Is it though, Daniel?
Hey everyone, it's Daniel Elwood and Robert Johnson, the Last Nighters, and the Last Nighters are part of the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com. This is episode 107 of the show. We made it this far. They said they couldn't be done, but we're going to be talking about Matthew McConaughey's Gold with Jared Wall of Breaking Liberty. You can find the show notes more at lastnighter.com/107. Welcome to the show, Jared. We appreciate you joining us once again. You were an excellent guest on the episode for the El Camino movie, the Breaking Bad movie. You, of course, do Breaking Liberty, which is a website about studying Breaking Bad from a libertarian perspective. You've got several books out related to that, so you're doing great stuff over there. And while we were recording that episode, you suggested the next time you come back, which is today, to do this movie Gold. So welcome to the show. Tell people where they can find your stuff and why. Remind us why you suggested this movie.
It's good to be back. Thanks for having me. Good to talk to you, Daniel and Robert. So breakingliberty.com. Like Daniel said, I got a couple books over there. Free downloads. Doesn't cost you anything, breakingliberty.com. Just a libertarian commentary on one of my favorite TV shows, Breaking Bad. I had a lot of fun writing it, and I think a lot of people have a lot of fun reading it. But as far as today's episode goes, Gold was a pretty good movie that I enjoyed with Matthew McConaughey. He plays a prospector, a miner, who goes out in search of the mother lode, and he strikes it rich and loses it all, and then gets it all back, and then loses it all again, and then gets some of it back again, and it's a roller coaster. But it was it's a fun movie, and there's a lot that a libertarian would talk about in there. You know, whether it's sound money issues, whether a gold standard, or the idea of government intervention and regulation, just all kinds of things. So it was a fun movie to watch, and I think it'll be a fun movie for us to talk about.
All right. Sounds like it's ripe for the pickings. And I did watch it, and I saw a lot of stuff in there definitely worthy of talking about. And what I tried to do in this particular instance was not overnote. Apparently, some of the feedback I've gotten is that when I am ill prepared, I say some of the best stuff than as opposed to when I have like 3 pages of notes. So we're gonna fly a little blind here. I did watch it. I took like 7 or 8 notes. Hopefully that's enough to get us going. And I know Robert is going to have tons of stuff to say, but we're going to start off with the Google description like we always do. So Gold came out 2016. It's a drama/crime film, 2 hours and 1 minute. 6.7 on IMDb, 43% Rotten Tomatoes, 49% Metacritic, and 83% of Google users like it. Kenny Wells, played by Matthew McConaughey, is a prospector desperate for a lucky break and teams up with a similarly eager geologist and sets off on an amazing journey to find gold in the uncharted jungles of Indonesia. Getting the gold was hard, but keeping it is even more difficult, sparking an adventure through the most powerful boardrooms of Wall Street. Came out December 30th, 2016. The director is Stephen Gagan. I'm not sure if I'm saying his name right. And it did a paltry $14.9 million at the box office. Robert, let's get your take on the opening here.
Well, I always appreciate it when a attractive person or actor ugs themselves up for a role, and McConaughey seems to go the extra mile. He's one of those Christian Bale types that doesn't mind, really kind of just letting his body go and wearing the bald wig and whatever just to get into that role. And even with all that stuff, though, I want to say that this is probably the most Matthew McConaughey that I've ever seen in a film. He really Matthew McConaughey's it up. I don't know if he's anything like the original character at all. It's really just Matthew McConaughey and a kind of chubby and schlubby looking. But I still enjoyed his performance. He still got a lot of charisma. And the movie itself, it's ripe with all kinds of libertarian themes. I mean, you got these entrepreneurs who are trying to go out and create value in the world, and they've got, all these obstacles to overcome. And they've got, other people that want to come in and, offer their services to help, push this thing or take it home. I think they call it landing the plane. They want to land this plane. You need our expertise to come help land this plane because you're out of your depth. This is too big for you. We know how to do this. And there's a whole lot of, you got to make that calculation. Do you think you can do it, or are you really out of your depth? Are these people adding value to this process, or can you do it yourself? I think there's a whole lot of, it's like we've talked in the past about, you could do it yourself, or you could hire somebody, or you could buy a thing. It's like, I bought these gloves. These are not expensive gloves. I bought these gloves for $3 at Walmart. $3. If I would have tried to make these gloves myself, I would have had to learn how to make, knit and crochet and whatever. It would have taken me a couple days. I mean, the labor costs alone, it would be hundreds of dollars. Or you could just buy them at Walmart for $3. So, he doesn't want to let it go. He thinks he's got it all and he can do it all, but it turns out he can't. And but he kind of gets screwed over. I mean, we can get into it. It's I think it's pretty fun. It really shows a lot of the things that an entrepreneur has to kind of go through to run a business. But then at the end, spoiler, it was all a lie. And I think there's going to be a really interesting topic to discuss if he gets to keep that money at the end or not.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good open. What's your take on the Google description and what Robert opened with there, Jared?
It's very accurate. It's there's so much to talk about, with the revolving door between regulatory government and Wall Street, and when Kenny Wells, when Matthew McConaughey had to take on that partnership, a backdoor plan was going to call in a favor with an ex-U.S. president that sits on their board, who happens to be friends with the president of Indonesia, to basically take over this mine that Wells had built. And Indonesia sends in their government and kicks them out and gives the mine to this other company. So there's a lot to be frustrated about from the entrepreneurial side, like Robert was saying. And even right in the beginning of the movie, when he's partnering with Acosta, the geologist, and he's like, how much money do you need? What's it going to take? And he's like, listen, it's not just the land lease and it's not just the equipment. We also got to get permits. And that means we got to line some pockets, so it's just the nature of government, especially when they control land resources like that. And just the idea of, I think one of the big issues in the movie that I took away from it was, the risk. People like, Bernie lovers and AOC lovers love to hate on capitalists and business owners and saying, that they just exploit labor, where they don't, the risk involved with trying to start a business, or in the movie's case, trying to build a mine, is just enormous. He had to pawn his girlfriend's or his wife's, I don't think the movie ever made it clear, his wife's gold watch, just in order to buy a plane ticket to go and try and sell Acosta on the idea. And And if he had failed, he would have lost everything. He would have been flipping burgers or tending bar or something. So he ended up getting really rich, but there was a chance that he could have ended up really, really poor. So I think that's something that people don't take into account a lot. And it was a roller coaster of a movie. I'm looking forward to seeing where we take the conversation.
Yeah, these are all interesting points, and it makes me want to jump off in so many different spots already. But the key thing that I noticed with what you were saying was he was already down to like his last desperate swing for the fences, kind of trying to get a home run with his last little bit of money, because he had worked with his dad and they went up through the the commodities bull run in the late 70s, and then things started trailing off in the early 80s. His dad ends up dying. He's kind of striking out in prospecting and mining, and so they lose most of the company. So he's not being very effective any longer. He keeps trying to push this stuff, but no one's buying. So he's kind of on his last desperate attempts. And then Acosta, who is like well known for this copper strike that he found, but then ever since that, which he was famous for, he had been kind of striking out. So he was also down on his luck. And so that's where, McConaughey knew that he had to go over there and like swing for the fences, try to get something to happen. And even that desperate situation doesn't even begin to show us how much further they sink in trying to find this gold. I mean, even just trekking up the river and then, out to this area where Acosta thinks this gold is going to be found is a tremendous undertaking. And then they're out there for months. They're trying to hire people after they've raised all this money, and it's not even close to the amount of money that Acosta said that they needed. They can't even pay the workers beyond a certain point, and they keep not finding money or not finding gold and running out of money. And then McConaughey catches malaria, and so he's like in this delirium, and probably going to die. Like all if he had a magic 8-ball, all signs point to him dying of this. And and then he makes a friend in Acosta, and this becomes important later, because all of a sudden, while he's about to recover, he's almost recovered from it, they strike gold. They find gold. Wink, wink. And so, that kind of goes back to what you were saying about how much effort and risk and struggle is being undertaken even before they get any reward whatsoever. And you're right, like the Bernie and AOC types and their fans don't see that at all. All they see is, hey, there's stuff over there, or there's somebody who has money or has something. And if we just take it, then we'll have it too. Right. There's no thought into how it came about or how it would continue to come about going forward. So it's a really short-sighted view of the world. And then you mentioned the almost nationalization of the mine due to political backdoor underhanded stuff. This is the same government, Suharto, who did a coup d'etat and overtook the previous regime in, I think, the 60s in Indonesia. And we did a movie a while back called The Act of Killing, which was about the enforcers for this guy who were killing all the communists, or as many communists as they could. I think there were 1 million deaths. And what's so crazy about the documentary is just how nonchalant they are about this, because it's just, they did it so much, they were totally desensitized to it. So I'll post a link to that on our show notes page, our discussion on The Act of Killing. It's a horrifying documentary to watch. But the irony of them going after the communists and then doing a nationalization type move, which is a communist move that they do in this movie to wrestle the permit and the mine away from McConaughey and Acosta is kind of crazy. Robert, I'll go to you. What do you think on the struggle that they went in to get it, and then how the government intervened, and then we can get into like the Wall Street stuff and the special friendship and the corniness that was called out later?
Well, it just shows you that all politicians are authoritarians, and then they'll gladly embrace whatever ideology helps get them elected. Maybe there are some true Bluetooth types, like maybe I guess Bernie actually believes the crap he's shilling, but I don't know. Most of them kind of just go along with whatever the polling data suggests will help them get elected, which leads to this kind of conglomeration of people that can't really differentiate themselves. That's why a lot of the lefties are all the same. But in terms of the risk involved, like it was a huge roll of the dice to throw everything you have, go into debt, I'm sure. Well, they were eventually selling stocks on the, basically on the core sample success, or the possible success based on this guy's reputation. And, they were selling shares basically on the hopes and the whims and the prayer of this turning out well. And it's massively risky because you've got a government there that could just swoop in and take it all away at any time. And in fact, at that one point in the film, when he's doing that deal and he doesn't want to sell because, they take the name off the mine, which really leads me to believe that he really was a true believer. Like at the end of the movie, I was like, wait a minute, was he telling the truth the whole time? Was he just selling a lie this entire time? If he really didn't want to sell that mine because they were going to take his name off it, it leads me to believe that he was in the dark the whole time. Unless that was like a super orchestrated play. Yeah. But it's a massive risk I would have just taken that guaranteed money, 100%, $300 million guaranteed, and then it becomes somebody else's problem. He had to have been a true believer, I suppose. But
yeah, or he could have turned it more somewhere down the line, like kind of a pressure negotiation tactic. But this is I guess played out in the 80s in the film, but in real life this happened in the 90s and in Canada. But they repurposed the story, changed all the names, changed the country to the United States so it'd be more appealing for the audience and whatnot. But I guess the guy this is based on, he maintained his innocence the entire time, and then ended up moving to the Bahamas, and he died a year later of an aneurysm. So you can imagine, like, he was probably going through a very stressful situation and ended up potentially ending his life. And I guess when he was in the Bahamas, armed men broke into his house and like demanded the money back from this fraud or this. By the way, spoilers, everyone. It becomes known that this is a fraud. This is not actually a gold mine. It's what they called it. They called it salting. So they would sprinkle in gold dust into the core samples that would go down and be assayed by an independent lab. Now that's what I didn't understand. They would send it out for assay. It's supposed to be totally protected, strict, secure protocols to confirm that this is a legitimate sample. But if, as it's revealed in the film, if it's obviously river gold, it's panned gold versus what would have been dug out of the ground by drilling, don't you think that they would have noticed? And they sort of play it off like, oh, everyone was so excited and caught up in the hype and the hysteria. But the assay lab was not like privy to the hype. You know what I mean? Like their job is to do one thing and one thing only, and that's to verify that these are legitimate samples that are, consistent with where they were claimed to have been found. Do you know what I'm saying? I
do know what you're saying, unless this is some sort of rating agency, Wall Street rating agency situation where there's just like the two of them, and a whole bunch of crap got AAA rated. Remember that? I don't know. This is some sort of rating agency, some kind of independent lab in Indonesia, which you would think their reputation is staked upon, their findings. So they end up looking really stupid when this all comes out. So it's a big blow to their reputation. So yeah, I don't remember this story from the 90s, but if this is as true as depicted in the film, although I doubt that check at the end was real. I just can't imagine. I mean, how would he have told anybody about that? Unless it came out in the news somehow that he had a big chunk of cash at the end.
Well, I think there was a lot of creative license in this, but you actually bring up an interesting point that we need to kind of back up for a second. When Acosta and McConaughey discover the gold or agree to go in and search for it, they do almost this handshake deal back of the napkin. And
literally back of the napkin.
Yeah, and McConaughey, or what's his name, Kenny, has him sign it, and then he says, all right, you hang on to this. And it basically says 50-50 split. And then when he gets the check at the end, after the guy allegedly gets murdered, Pinochet style out of a helicopter, there's that contract sent back to him along with this deposit slip for a Bank of Gibraltar for half of the missing money, the 168 million or whatever it was, 162 million. So like 80 million bucks deposited in this account, and he gives him back the contract. So the contract plays a pivotal role in the story, at least in the
as presented, if we are to believe it. Yes. Yeah. And it just shows you, contracts are valid, and it's nice to see people going through on their contracts. I like it. Even though it's all fraudulent. I mean, it's all based on fraud. So is that contract valid? It's all predicated on fraud. In watching this, and Jared, I'll get your opinion on this. I felt like there was, at the time of signing this contract, they both believed they were going to find gold in this area, and they were on the up and up. They were like, we think this is a good spot. We're going to look. We're going to agree to split the proceeds 50-50. And it's only after McConaughey is like down to his last dimes, says, hey, put the last whatever you need on this credit card. Go do what you need to get the workers to come back because they were not able to pay them anymore. And so what Acosta did was he took the credit cards and bought water filters because the people in the area were like Flint, Michigan, didn't have clean water. And so their kids were getting sick and all this stuff. Meanwhile, these people are also panning for gold. It's like the Golden River or whatever the Indonesian name of it was. It translated to Gold River or Golden River. And so they were finding gold in the river. And apparently that's where Acosta got the gold to salt the core samples with by providing water. And this was another angle I wanted to go with. He's out there helping people. He's providing a valuable, needed service of clean water for these people who are living in this area that don't have it otherwise, making their lives better, making the health of their kids better. But I think it was only because he felt sorry for McConaughey's character, who was dying of malaria and down to his last dimes and giving it to him. He had to come up with something to, I don't know, like make things better than they were. You know what I mean? Like I think originally when the contract was signed, he did not intend to defraud anybody. But it was only when he was like desperate. He was like, all right, I'm going to, I guess, say, hey, we found gold. And then he just, the lie carried forward. And I think the Kenny character was in the dark on that the whole time. But he's the one who got caught up in hysteria, right? He's the one who like ignored certain red flags or certain warning signs because he wanted to ride that wave. So Jared, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I think you bring up a lot of good points, especially, I mean, I want to talk about the workers, the people that they brought in to do the mine. And there's a flashback at one point showing the Acosta mine when he struck that big copper strike. And it just shows hundreds and hundreds of people working on that mine. And part of those people were, similar to the people we saw working on their gold mine later on, living in huts, panning the river for gold, for a little something here and there. But they really don't have anything until, the capital gets brought in. And then it also shows the freedom that workers have when they stopped getting paid, when Wells and Acosta ran out of money. they just walked away. You know, they were like, okay, well, this is a waste of our time. We can do better things over here. And it took Acosta going and getting them the water filters to bring them back. And I think you're you know, that's when Wells is getting interviewed by the FBI at the, you know, kind of throughout the movie, but then you kind of really figure out what's going on at the end of the movie. He says that he's like, he woke up from his malaria, and Acosta's saying, hey, I'm not finding anything, I'm going to pull the plug. And he was like, no, you can't let me die out here for nothing. Here, take these 2 credit cards I have left. There's $2,300 on them. Do whatever you got to do. And Acosta has pity on him. And then, you know, 2 weeks later, or however long later, whenever Wells actually wakes up from his malarial coma, and Acosta kind of listens to him, is like, hey, we're finding 1/8 of an ounce per ton of soil. And then that celebration, that, you know, I can't imagine striking gold like that euphoria just has to be on a totally another level. And I think the acting at that particular point was really well done by both of them. You know, Wells because he actually thinks he struck gold, and Acosta because he knows that they didn't actually strike gold, but wants Acosta to think they did, or wants Wells to think they did. Very fascinating. And then, yeah, they leave it pretty ambiguous as to how exactly they pulled the wool over everybody's eyes, as far as thinking that this river gold was actual gold, and how they thought that this mine was producing gold when there was really nothing there at all. And, you know, their stock goes from 4 cents a share or nothing per share up to, I think I saw in the movie up to like $70 per share. So it's just a skyrocketing valuation. And it's similar to the Brie X, that's the Canada company that you were talking about, this movie's loosely based on. It went from a penny stock to worth over $280 at some point. Imagine buying into that company when it's worth pennies, and then selling it when it's worth $280. You're gonna ride that wave as McConaughey, as Wells did in the movie.
And that's another key point. He had told one of his coworkers, hey, don't keep all this stock, sell some of it, put some of it away, because it has gone from pennies to hundreds of dollars. Sell some of it so that you've got this nest egg. But of course, it's revealed that he doesn't do that, and he loses everything.
He loses everything, yeah.
Yeah. So take some of your wins, take some of your money off the table when you do well. All right, everyone. I'm not a licensed financial advisor, but I'm just saying, in the movie, he makes a good point, and the guy disregards that advice.
And next time you're at the blackjack table and you're up $100, put some of it in your pocket and then play.
Sound advice. And always double down on 11. All right. So I want to interject one thing related to the water filters. And this is kind of a key point. Those people were panning for gold and finding gold, but they lived in this very remote area and had very little awareness of the outside civilization. So it shows you the power of advertising or information contained within individuals who are knowledgeable about stuff. Like, only because these 2 prospectors were in that area, even knew about water filters and knew that water filters could be purchased and brought there to solve this problem these people were having. They weren't even aware that there was a solution to have, even though they could have afforded it. So it just shows you that advertising or specialized knowledge can have a very powerful and profound impact on people's lives, even in life or death situations.
Yeah, and that's also, you know, kind of going back to the risk that entrepreneurs take. You know, they're doing that and providing all that stuff for them, and providing jobs and providing water filters before they had made any money. So the lives of the local people had improved before anything happened, before they struck gold. And that's similar to anybody who's trying to start a business. If you're building an apartment complex or something like that, all of the construction workers get paid, and then, you know, it takes, say, 8 to 10 years before you recoup your investment. But in that 8 to 10 years, you're providing housing, you're providing jobs, you're providing, maintenance employees to do their stuff. You got to hire people to, come fix water pipes when they burst and things like that. And the initial investor, the capitalist, the hated capitalist, doesn't make any money, doesn't even break even until 8 to 10 years later. And the locals in this movie were way up before anything happened.
Right. And this is why when people talk about like people don't get the full value of their labor, well, that's because they want to be paid now or consistently, not wait 5, 10, however long years before the thing would actually be profitable. And they're also not going to assume any of the loss if it never becomes profitable. So that's why people's wages aren't going to be the full value of whatever they've allegedly created. And that doesn't even count any of the fact of the capital or the equipment that is required to make them that productive.
Right, and the risk involved. They're not assuming hardly any of the risk that the capitalist is.
Yeah, or the time value of the money. Right.
Sure.
Because the workers want to be paid every 2 weeks or every month or whatever it is. And if the capitalist who, ends up, nobody wants to buy that thing, nobody wants to buy that apartment complex or live in that apartment complex or buy that widget, and it has to end up at the grocery outlet or some liquidator, and they're just going to lose their ass on it. The workers still got paid, and they don't have to return that money. So anyway, I'm totally veering off into other areas here. Robert, I know you got something fired up.
Well, I was just curious. I mean, I want to get into some later stuff, but let's not do that just yet. I wanted to ask Jared if he saw Acosta like you see him, Daniel, as this, good guy who just kind of gets caught up trying to do a good thing for this new friend of his, and then the lie kind of spirals out of control and it gets really big. And at what point do you pull the plug and eventually he does, of course. And then, do you see him as a good guy, or do you see him as like a fraudster from the beginning?
I kind of saw him the same way Daniel did, and the same way that Wells saw him, because when he's getting interviewed by the FBI, he's trying to explain, he was trying to. I think Wells says he was trying to buy time. He needed some more time to keep digging because he really felt the gold was there, but he hadn't found it yet. But they were out of money, so why don't we just say we found gold, and that'll help us raise more money, and then I'll have more time to keep looking for the gold, and then it'll actually show up, which it never did. But yeah, I don't know if he was a shyster. I mean, obviously he turned into a shyster, and the fact that he didn't fess up after it, he let it blow up into these epic proportions without saying anything, and it came out that he was. When it got to that point, when it was trading at, some hyperinflated value, the stock shares were trading at some hyperinflated value, he had sold off a bunch of his shares. That's how he ended up with that 160 some odd million that he took off with. So he got really
shell
rich.
Corporations. Yeah.
Right. He got really rich off of his initial lie, and was cool with it. And so, that's kind of a slimy thing to do. For sure, but I think initially he did it for good reasons, if you can say it that way. He was trying to help a friend. He had come to care about Wells, and Wells probably was looking like he was gonna die there. And Wells said to him, "Don't let me die out here for nothing." And in a land like Indonesia, or for a guy who has Acosta's type of background, he wanted to make do on that promise that he did make to him, while he was basically on his deathbed. But then he took it too far, for sure.
I can't imagine that he had masterminded this whole scheme ahead of time. I think it just a series of events kept building and building, and then he had this opportunity and he took it. At least that would be my take on it. Because they said that also this was after Suharto's government took the mine over, and then they befriend his idiot son, which was actually another angle we could talk about. The what's that called? The nepotism and the cronyism, but then they appeal to his senses about women and fast cars and Cadillacs and whatnot. they end up getting just 15% of the value of the mine back. And even Acosta's selling all of those shares that he owned of the 15%, and his half or whatever was still 168 million. But they said that also Danny, the Suharto guy, sold all of his shares as well, or a bunch of his shares. So the Indonesian government made a shit ton of money as a result of this fraud as well. But wouldn't...
Well, Suharto did.
Right,
Suharto's not necessarily that money's staying with the family.
Yeah. It's the Indonesian guy, the government, took or the Suharto guy took all that money.
Yeah.
But wouldn't that affect the share price? It didn't seem to, in at least how it was portrayed in the movie. Like, oh, these insiders sold all these shares, these big players. Wouldn't that depress the price because there's a bunch more available? Like you would
think that the stock would drop. I mean, anytime there's a big time sell off, the price goes down. If there's anytime there's more people selling or more shares available to be bought than sold.
I mean, if Eddie Murphy and Dan Aykroyd taught me anything about futures and orange juice, there's big swings when somebody sells off a bunch of stuff.
That's right. No, you're right. If that last scene in that movie is to be true, in Trading Spaces is to be believed. But so anyway, you guys we need to answer this question. And I think it's probably the most interesting question of the whole film. When he gets that check for $82 million, does he deserve that money? Does he deserve to keep that money? Or should he give it back to the investors? Now, when the investors are, buying shares of stock in this company, it's not a guaranteed return, right? It's a risk. It's a gamble. You're not owed anything. You're assuming, you're looking at what's being said, what's being reported, and then making a valuation determination based on that, how much you want to invest and how high you think it's going to go, what do you think it's really worth. If you think you can buy it now when it's undervalued, you're going to buy and then sell when it's overvalued, right? You're going to make those calculations. But you're not necessarily owed any value. You are essentially gambling. So I find it super hard to say that, well, all the investors should get all their money back. But at the same time, I also say, well, you totally did that. You earned all that money based on fraud, so you don't deserve to keep it either. So I don't know. What is the proper libertarian answer to this one, Daniel?
Well, I'll take a swing and then I'll go to Jared with the same question. But my swing would be, well, they're providing fraudulent data. So they're lying to the people who are making the decision to invest or not. And so they are, in effect, not being forthright. And so I think anyone who invests based on lies and misinformation has standing in some kind of demonstrated loss.
Okay.
So I think in an ANCAP society, you would have some repercussions from that. There'd be an arbitration or some kind of, dispute resolution that would happen as a result. Jared, your take.
I think that makes a lot of sense. I mean, I don't know what the solution is though, because you're correct in that if somebody was investing based on lies, then they deserve something back. But that company ended up being worth about $30 billion. So all the shares, however many shares there were divided by $30 billion, they weren't going to make everybody whole by any means with 160 million. 162 million is not 30 billion by any means. So they weren't going to become whole. It wasn't going to adequately, so would it go even further than that? Would it go, if he said, okay, split up this 80 million amongst the investors who invested based on lies? Well, it doesn't even come close to making up what they invested. Should he be forced into some kind of private prison and have his go towards trying to make these people whole? I guess kind of more of just like what's he going to do with? I mean, they're trying to see if he profited from this fraud, and if he then obviously you just profited. If it was me in that situation, I would just frame it and put it on the wall and have it be as a souvenir. And hey, that was a fun ride. Now I got to get on with the rest of my life.
I like both of your answers. I like it a lot. I think those are good, strong answers. I worry a little bit that when we start saying what fraud is and what isn't, because anytime you're an investor investing in any kind of company, all the numbers are essentially cooked to be the best looking numbers. All companies operate with a certain level of, I don't know if you want to say like misinformation or like secrecy.
Massaging the numbers, like lying with.
Yeah, you massage the numbers, you make everything look good. You talk about how rosy your projections are going to be for the next quarter, how those are always going to be great. You're always dealing with a certain level of misinformation and imperfect information, right? Like, so as an investor, you're never going to know every single thing about a company. That's just not possible.
Even if everything was above board, you could never possibly know everything.
Right. So there's always a certain level of fraud. So, I mean, anytime your stocks lose money, are you owed? Because there's always fraud. There's always lies. I see your point in that this was based entirely on fraud. And I think that when people invent entire companies out of thin air, yeah, I would say that the investors were duped and were just deserved some of their monies back. But I also don't want to go to the point where you're like, anytime a company loses money, you get your money back. Anytime you lose money, you get your money back. There is risk in investing. There's risk in life, and it's kind of a lesson to be learned. I mean, the people that put all their money in one stock, are you insane? What is wrong with you? You lose your life savings in one stock. Who puts all their eggs in one basket? I don't care how good the projections are. That's just a life lesson right there.
All right, so I have a bit of a talking out of my ass point to make here.
Do it.
But I think that absent regulation, that there would be standards of the level of information and accuracy of information that would win out in the marketplace. And those who are better forecasters or better reporters of their information would win out. But when regulations are imposed and certain reporting requirements, if you've ever read a 10K or an annual report, you'll see all of these things that are required to be in there where they have to say, here's all the risks involved. There might be a tsunami tomorrow, or there's other competitors in the landscape. They have to actually spell all this out due to regulations. And I think that is what induces these companies to look for loopholes or other ways to massage numbers. Like we saw it with the WorldCom, the MCI stuff, and Enron. They were cooking the books in certain ways, or they'll, I forget the proper term for this, but they would somehow do some shady maneuver in their bookkeeping so that on the day of reporting, it would appear much more better, like a much better position than the reality, because the day after that reporting number snapshot is taken, then they'd move everything back to where it was. And it would, if people were aware of it, it would have been like, oh, they're in a precarious position here. They're actually doing shitty. But I think that they're kind of, because of all these regulations, it throws off what would otherwise have been more accurate information. Do you know what I'm saying? And this might not be making a whole lot of sense, because I'm not too clear on this stuff. This is not my expertise by any stretch. But final point related to this is this Bria X situation with gold miners and mining companies in Canada. As a result of this is when Canada decided, oh, we must impose regulations on the mining industry to protect investors and consumers. They didn't exist as a regulated body of industry until after this event. So anyone can pick up from there. Tell me I'm full of shit, but I think I'm kind of onto something. I think that by imposing government regulations, it forces the hand of government or of the businesses, and it muddies the waters of the information, and it incentivizes finding ways to maneuver and manipulate the numbers in certain ways to try to meet the letter of the law, but it causes problems.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I'm skeptical that the mining industry actually wasn't regulated prior to this event, though. I think a lot of times politicians will create a law that's a stupid law that creates a lot of problems, and then, you know, like when the housing bubble happened, they were like, "Oh, look at this! This is terrible. What we needed was more regulation." There's this due to what was it? What was the fucking thing that they took away, Glass-Steagall?
Yeah.
That allowed them to do all this crap and whatever. Anyway.
That's what gets blamed, but has very little to do with it, as Tom Woods talks about in his book Meltdown.
Yeah. Anyway. They always blame lack of regulation when it's almost always the regulations problem. So I think you're making a good point there, Daniel.
Yeah,
Right.
I think if there was no government, and because all these Wall Street companies and big banks and financial corporations and conglomerates, they're heavily regulated with the government to the point where they're almost another arm of the government. So, you know, if all of that didn't exist and this situation arose where, hey, these guys are saying they're found millions of ounces of gold over in Indonesia, then the financial companies, if they were operating in a free market, would, before they invest, they would probably do a very thorough investigation before they put hundreds of millions of dollars into something. That's, you know, I don't see how they wouldn't. So they kind of show that they looked at it a little bit, but they sent 3 guys over there and they took them out into the river and they panned for gold, and they found 1 nugget of gold in the river, and that got them all excited and sold them on the idea that, okay, I guess this is legit. Let's do it.
You know, that made me think,
and
mine pan for gold here, guys.
Yeah, I don't know how panning for gold convinces them that the mine is full of gold.
It's got to come from somewhere.
Yeah, exactly.
It comes from somewhere, sure,
panning,
but doesn't necessarily need to come from that spot.
Unless they were panning stuff that they had pulled out of the mine and they were panning that soil specifically. But then, you know, they show later, you know, the difference between river gold and rock gold. You know, river gold is very rounded. It's been eroded away so that it's, you know, nice and smooth. Rock gold is, you know, very coarse and edgy. The nugget that they pull out of that pan is very rounded, you know, the nugget that they show them. So yeah, it's very ambiguous in the movie how they got away with it. And in what I was reading about, you know, the actual story in Canada, they don't really go into a whole lot of details as to how they got away with it, other than saying that they salted the core samples. I think it's funny. I was reading about what happened up in Canada, and some of the biggest investors who lost money in that fraud were the Ontario Municipal Employees Retirement Board, the Ontario Teachers Pension, the Quebec Sector Pension Fund. So all of these government unions and government, they were the ones who put all their eggs in one basket, so to speak, and they were the ones who got burned. Very, very interesting to me, and kind of, you know, we all know, or I guess us libertarians know, how underfunded these pension funds all over the country are, to the tune of hundreds of trillions of dollars, or whatever it is, whatever the crazy number is. And can't help but think that decisions like this along with a whole bunch of other stuff, is possibly a reason why that is.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, and actually read that as well, and wanted to bring that up. That really, if those were the biggest losers, then
Yeah.
I feel so bad. Is that wrong? Is that wrong? But you'd also think that the curators or custodians of those funds making these decisions would be like, hey, we're going to put these into safer investments, not this risky, mining stuff.
Not this penny stock. Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know.
You would think.
Yeah, and it wasn't like the individual people making these decisions. The people who, like, it was their pension money that 2% of their money went in every month or whatever. It was the people scraping the commissions off the top and making these poor decisions.
I have a question for you guys. I'm going to change the subject a little bit, if that's okay.
It certainly is. We are going to need to start to wind down the show in a little bit, though.
Yeah, I got to go to bed soon too. So, but so us as libertarians and Rothbardians and Austrians and whatnot, we're not fans of fiat money, and we would much prefer going to a gold and the silver standard and having gold and silver be money. Does this movie, in your opinion, give any? Does it explain at all why we think that gold actually has value and has more staying power as a money than paper, than the system that we have currently?
Go for it, Robert, and I'll.
Well, I don't know if this movie does a good job. I mean, it basically depicts a couple of fraudsters mining for gold. I don't know if it does a really good job. I mean, it talks about how valuable it is and the effort required to get it out of the ground, and that it's actually a tangible asset. There is one line that McConaughey says towards the end of the movie, almost at the exact end of the movie, as the interview is wrapping up. He says, "I don't care about money. I care about gold, and it's different." Now, I don't know if he's making the argument that fiat dollars aren't the same as this hard gold asset, but it seems to be making some sort of a value judgment there. I don't think he's actually making a fractional reserve banking thing or a fiat dollar argument, but I do appreciate that, as a Rothbardian, as an Austrian, I do appreciate that he is talking about an actual physical asset as opposed to some fiat thing that's just pumped up. But then again, the whole movie is about this company that was just artificially inflated. So,
Yeah, that's a good point. They were running the theoretical printing presses with over estimating how much gold they had found, or fraudulently saying how much gold they had found. But yeah, to Robert's point, I think that they don't really get into it too much, other than showing how difficult it is to find gold and mine it in any significant way, so that it's not like you can just print more dollars or enter more digits as they do now in the central bank's coffers. So in that way, there is a relationship between, in a free market, you would invest the capital to consume or to extract gold based on market conditions. So if more gold was needed, then more resources would be taken from other things and used to search out for gold, so that the money supply or the gold supply would be somewhat a reflection of the overall capacity of the economy. If you follow what I'm saying, like it would be balanced out between, like, everything needs to be directed in some field, some productive capacity. And so to increase gold production, you would need to decrease in other areas. And so in that way, it's like a proxy for how well things are doing. Rothbard's got a bunch of books related to this. One of the short books that is really highly recommended to read, that kind of gets into this, and then also the perversion of money away from gold towards currency and fiat currency is what has government done to our money. So I'll put that on our show notes page. It's a short read, probably a couple hours, if that, and it's got some really interesting history in it. But that's kind of my take on it. I think it's nice to hear him talk about the tangible natures of gold. And I mean, if you hold a gold coin in your hand, you do feel something. At least I did. And so I'm a fan, but I don't think you really got into the nuance and the weeds of why it's, an argument for a gold standard or anything like that. And I would say one other thing, Jared, to your comment where you're saying that we would favor a gold standard or a silver standard, I think that's just shorthand for a market-based currency or competing currencies that historically gold and silver have won out. We're not saying that we want the government to enforce gold or silver or gold and silver being money.
Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. For sure. And I guess mostly what I saw in the movie was that it showed how difficult it is to, if gold becomes the money, or whatever it is, whatever precious metal becomes the money, how difficult it is to add to the supply of money. And as the Austrian theory of the business cycle goes, it's the inflation of the money supply is what causes the booms and the busts. How difficult that would be if you have to dig it up out of the earth, as opposed to turning on a printing press, or opposed to pressing a couple of buttons on a computer keyboard.
Right. And think of all the wars that couldn't happen, or all of the, the taxes that it would be different. It would definitely change a lot of things. It would be a big restraint on government. And that's, of course, why it's not possible. And that's another thing I wanted to bring up related to this movie real quickly is it was illegal for you or me to own gold in the United States from 1933 until 1986, I think, right?
Was it that long?
I think that the U.S. Gold Coinage Act was passed in 1986, and that was the first year that the American Eagle was made. Wow. It might have been made not illegal, maybe in the 70s or something like that, like that commodities run up during the inflationary times. But that's when gold minted coins became a thing again, was I think in 1986. But there was a period of time, many decades, where even owning gold was illegal.
Yeah, I knew FDR had passed that law and was confiscating or having people turn in their gold for a while. But then it was Nixon, I think, that finally completely closed the gold window. So dollars were, at least maybe on the central bank level, were convertible into gold. I guess maybe still wasn't legal at the individual level.
Right. Yeah. It was international. So we would have France's gold and they could redeem it for $35 an ounce. And because of the guns and butter programs of the 60s and 70s with Johnson and Nixon, de Gaulle and other leaders started saying, well, okay, start giving us our gold back. Here's $35. Here's $35. Here's $35. And before you knew it, they were kind of running low on gold. And so Nixon, August 15th, 71, said, all right, I'm closing the gold window. We're going to a fiat standard. We're all Keynesians now. This is after, of course, he did all these price controls. And he was supposedly the free market Republican when he was running for office. But he was the one who imposed price controls. And there's a great lecture. I'll post a link to it. But it's where Rothbard says he's hopping mad. It's about price controls. Super funny.
Good stuff.
Cool. All right. Well, I think we're at a point where we can talk about any final notes and then summary review, score out of 1 to 10, decimal point deep. Robert, you got any final notes, or you want to kick us off here?
Well, this movie reminds me of another gold mining movie. I don't know if anybody else has seen it. It's an old movie starring Humphrey Bogart called The Treasure of the Sierra Madre. And it's the movie that gave us the famous badges? We don't need no stinking badges line that was made fun of in Blazing Saddles. But in that film, and the reason I remember it is because when I originally saw it, this is a long time ago, the prospector, there's an old time He's talking about the value of the gold and why gold is so valuable. And at the time, it made sense to me, back when I didn't know anything. But he says the gold is valuable because it takes so long to dig it up. And there's a whole lot of effort involved to dig it up. Basically, he's talking about the labor theory of value. And I don't know if it's a good movie. I don't remember it being a good movie. But that line has stuck with me because I'm like, yeah, it made sense at the time. Humans, it takes a lot of effort. A lot of, it's required to dig gold up. But of course, that's not what gives gold its value. It gets gold its value because of its desirability, its use as a tradable commodity, as a money.
As dental fillings.
Yeah, dental fillings, of course.
The jewelry, as adornment. Yeah, and it's
all those reasons.
And it's not that the human labor went into it to get the gold that imbued it with the value. It's because it was valuable, somebody was willing to invest the time and effort to get it.
Indeedly do. But this film, Gold, yeah, it was really good. I read one review that said, this is a good movie, but not a lot happens in it. And then watching, I'm like, what are you talking about? He gains a fortune, he loses it. He gains a fortune, he loses it. He gains a fortune. All kinds of crap's going on in this film, and it's all quite engaging. I don't know how accurate the film is, but it tells us a good story, in my opinion. It shows a lot of the dangers involved for entrepreneurs, maybe more than most entrepreneurs. I mean, not everybody's going to Indonesia and has to deal with the Indonesian government in order to run a business. But I mean, there's probably just as much, if not more, regulation here in the United States than there is in Indonesia. I mean, Suharto's government's probably a little more murderous than most. Since, we did do that Act of Killing movie, it's pretty brutal how many people he murdered. But no, I thought this was a really good film. What would I rate it? Like a 7.5? Yeah. I mean, it's not perfect, but I can't really think of a whole lot of flaws. I thought it was quite solid entertainment.
All right. Well, very good, Robert. I'm going to tend to agree with you for the most part, though I did think that it was a bit confusing with some of the stuff that was going on. I think that was just with the timing and the narrative. They were starting to introduce the FBI interviews, and so I was a little bit confused when those started coming in. Like, okay, where are we in the timeline here? Clearly, this is after events have happened, so it seemed to jump around a little bit. And I think there was maybe a bit of the shop talk or nomenclature that people might not be familiar with. Like Jared, you brought up, like they said, oh, they found 1/8 of an ounce per ton. Well, to the layperson, what does that even mean? I mean, I look at an ounce. I know what an ounce of gold is, but 1/8 of an ounce, so that's 8 tons of material. That sounds like a shit ton to have to go through to get just an ounce, and to equate that to value, to make it worth the effort is I don't know, just a little bit kind of hard to conceive of. But for the most part, I mean, McConaughey. He does his Christian Bale, body transformation. He's got this big beer belly. He's got the bald wig and all this stuff. But he does a great job. I like the Acosta character, the guy who played him. I wanted to ask if you guys had thought about the whether his helicopter adventure was him actually being murdered by the government, or if it was a faked death, suicide type thing, so that he could abscond with the money.
Yeah, I mean, with the fact that Suharto's son was selling off his stock beforehand, that had to have been a fake thing. I mean, it just doesn't. I could see someone killing somebody, but it seemed like he had involved those people and at least let enough of them know to profit off the whole situation that he had a pass from there, I'm sure.
Right. And the body, like the face and the hands, were eaten by pigs. And I guess the genitalia was cut off, severed. So who knows? But it seems
who was it?
A fake
pre-DNA, so.
Yeah. It does seem like a fake your death situation, though. Like if you wanted to get away with it, what better way than to be dead? But overall, I think it was a really good movie. Just a little bit kind of lost me in some spots. It did seem a little bit slow despite a whole bunch of stuff happening. But I do love McConaughey as an actor, and for the most part, it was pretty good. So I'm going to go with a 7 on this. So Jared, we'll go to you.
Yeah, you guys both said some really good stuff. Yeah, I want to pick on the Bernie and the AOC people a little bit more. I want, there's so we touched on Wells inherited that company from his dad, who had inherited it from his grandfather. And a lot of people would say, oh, so that's why we need an inheritance tax, because he has an unfair advantage. And I just, it show, with the fact that Wells had basically, I don't know if he had run it into the ground or it was just the market had failed and caused the company to become, to lose value. But the idea that because you've inherited something, that you're somehow in an unfair situation and you owe something to somebody else, I've never really bought into. I think that's really dangerous of an idea. So I just wanted to throw that out there really quick. But as far as the movie goes, I'm with you guys. I really enjoyed it. I enjoyed it the first time I watched it, and I enjoyed it again. The second time that I went and watched it through for this podcast. I loved the acting. I thought the story was entertaining. I really liked the music in the movie. I thought the score was excellent. I'll go with Robert. I'm going to give it a 7.5.
All right, pretty solid outing for everyone here. So thank you for that. Well, Jared, it's been a pleasure having you on, and I think we've talked about having you on again rather soon. And it's a movie that Robert had brought up recently and he wanted to do. And so I mentioned that movie too. And you're like, I want to do that. So Captain Phillips will be the next one you are on for, and that will be a special Valentine's episode. It'll come out right around or on Valentine's Day, whatever the calendar says. So we'll have you back in just a few short weeks. But prior to that, we're going to be doing a couple of other episodes with other guests. And the next one is going to be Leaf of Faith, the Netflix documentary about this plant derivative product called kratom. And the guy we're having on is John Bush. He is, I believe his company's called Brave Botanicals. He's been on the Tom Woods show recently talking about kratom and how the FDA and the government tries to shut it down and what the positive effects of it can be. So he will have plenty to discuss on this documentary. He's actually screened it for people and then had, I think, Q&A afterwards. So it should be a really, really interesting discussion. So I'm looking forward to that, as well as your next appearance with us, Jared, for Captain Phillips in just a few weeks from now.
Yeah, I'm excited about that. There's the Somali pirates and just that whole region of the world has a particularly close meaning to me in my personal life. So I've taken a big interest in Somalia and East Africa. And so I'm excited to talk about that.
All right. We're looking forward to that as well. And if you can stick around for just a bit longer, I know you're getting ready to go to bed because it is a Thursday night and you're late on the East Coast, but we do have a thing available for our Patreon supporters that we call Kathleen Turner Overdrive, which is a little bit of bonus content for everyone. So anyone who wants a piece of that, get us at lastnairs.com/Patreon. You can donate some dollars this way, and we will give you special access VIP passes to all the good stuff. And we look forward to having you guys for that. So this has been episode 107 of the show, lastnairs.com/107. It can also be found on the Launchpad Media, where they're always launching new ideas in your direction. Check it out at thelaunchpadmedia.com, and we will say good night from last night, everyone.